Ha traced the familiar curve of the dirt road with his eyes, a road that had, for 23 years, been both a tether and a release. Now it was pulling him back. The village, nestled against the encroaching emerald tapestry of the forest, exhaled the cool, damp breath of dusk, a scent he'd only ever truly found here. It was a symphony of earth and ancient wood, of distant bird calls, and the gentle rush of the stream that wound around the village's edge, a silver ribbon glinting under the fading light. He remembered every pebble, every gnarled root that threatened to trip the unwary traveler, every whisper carried on the wind. He was Ha, an architecture student, whose hands, more accustomed to the sleek lines of a city blueprint, now clasped the worn strap of his backpack, a stark contrast to the rustic beauty surrounding him. He had returned not for leisure, but for purpose. The village elders, in a rare moment of progressive thought, had commissioned a new community center.
Ha, with his local roots and modern training, was their chosen son, tasked with surveying the land, transforming sketches into a tangible structure that would rise from the very earth he now walked. This land, however, bore a heavier history than most. Locals spoke in hushed tones of ancient times, when this very soil, particularly near the old wooden bridge, had been an execution ground, a place where sorrows were not merely buried, but seeped into the ground, creating a lingering, resentful energy, an wan chi that some claimed still clung to the evening air like a shroud. His ancestral home, a modest dwelling with a faded ochre facade, welcomed him with a familiar creak of the gate. Dust motes danced in the last slivers of sunlight piercing the windows, illuminating decades of quiet history. He dropped his bag, the thud echoing in the stillness, and began the ritual of opening windows, allowing the village's evening song to drift in. The scent of cooking fires, the distant laughter of children, the incessant hum of cicadas, it was all a comforting balm after the city's relentless clangor. He unpacked slowly, meticulously, his mind already drifting to grid lines and structural integrity. Yet there was an underlying tremor, a faint disharmony beneath the surface calm that he couldn't quite place. It was the ancestral whispers, perhaps, the collective memory of a place steeped in both beauty and an unspoken sorrow. Sleep didn't come easily that first night. Bed, though familiar, felt different, the silence too profound after years of urban din. He tossed and turned, his mind racing through potential designs, through the structural challenges of building on what was rumored to be cursed land. Just as he felt the soft embrace of slumber beginning to claim him, a sound, delicate yet piercing, sliced through the quiet. It was a sob.
A soft, muffled, yet undeniably human sob, seemingly emanating from right outside his window. He froze, every muscle tensing. He strained his ears, convinced it was merely a trick of the wind, the rustle of leaves against the pane. But no, there it was again, clearer this time, a choked gasp followed by the distinct sound of someone weeping, a profound, heart-wrenching sound that resonated with an ancient sorrow. It wasn't the cries of a child, nor the wails of an adult in pain. This was a deeper, more primal lament, filled with a grief so immense it felt impossibly heavy. He pushed himself up, heart thumping against his ribs, a cold dread snaking its way up his spine. Slowly, cautiously, Ha padded towards the window. The room was bathed in an ethereal moonlight that filtered through the leaves of the ancient banyan tree outside, casting dancing shadows on the walls. He hesitated, his hand hovering over the latch, a strange mixture of curiosity and primal fear warring within him.
What if it was just a stray animal, or a villager overcome by some private grief? Yet, the thought of someone weeping alone in the dark, right outside his window, sent a shiver down his back that had nothing to do with the night's chill. He took a deep breath, steeling himself, and with a swift, decisive motion, unlatched the wooden frame and pushed the window open. A gust of cool night air swept into the room, carrying with it the damp smell of earth and distant foliage. He peered out, his eyes scanning the immediate vicinity. The dirt road, usually a dark ribbon, was now veiled in a thin, silvery mist that clung to the ground like a phantom limb, obscuring the path beyond a few meters. The old wooden fence, the scraggly bushes that lined the property, the sturdy trunk of the banyan tree, all stood silent and still, bathed in the moon's pale glow. There was no one, absolutely no one.
The sobbing had ceased the instant the window opened, replaced by the profound, unsettling silence of the empty night. Ha's brow furrowed. He leaned out further, his gaze sweeping left and right, trying to pierce the veil of mist, trying to find any trace, any movement, any lingering shadow that might explain the heartbreaking sound he had heard. But the road was deserted, eerily so. A deep sense of unease settled over him, heavier than any fatigue. He slowly retracted his head, preparing to close the window, dismissing it as a figment of his imagination, a dream half remembered in the cusp of waking. As his hand moved to grasp the frame, his fingers brushed against something cool and damp. He paused, his gaze dropping to the smooth, aged wood of the sill. There, imprinted clearly against the dark grain, was a handprint.
It was small, delicate, unmistakably human, and still visibly wet, as if someone had just placed their palm there, their touch lingering, cold and damp, a ghostly echo in the quiet night. The droplets of water glistened faintly in the moonlight, stark and undeniable. Ha stared at it, his heart now a frantic drum against his ribs. It wasn't a dream. Someone had been there, and they had been crying. The wet handprint, a silent, chilling testament, contradicted the empty road, defying all logic. It was too small for a man, too refined for a child's playful touch. It spoke of a slender hand, an adult woman's perhaps, a woman who had stood there, in the dark, weeping. And now, only this cold, damp imprint remained, a spectral signature on the edge of his reality. Ha slowly closed the window, his gaze still fixed on the handprint, his breath catching in his throat.
The village, which had once felt like home, now felt like a place holding its breath, a place where the past was not merely history, but an active, weeping presence. The first night had barely begun, and already Ha knew this survey was going to be far more complicated than blueprints and land dimensions could ever predict. Ha stared at the damp handprint, a silent accusation against the stillness of the night. His breath hitched, a cold knot tightening in his stomach. He reached out, his own fingers trembling slightly, and gently brushed the impression. The wood felt cool and rough beneath his touch, but the moisture was undeniable, a subtle sheen that caught the moonlight. He tried to wipe it away, a nervous, almost automatic gesture, but it remained, stubborn and defiant, a chilling testament to the night's strange visitor. A profound sense of being watched prickled at the back of his neck. Though the room was undeniably empty, the window now firmly latched.
He retreated from the window, pulling the thin curtain closed as if to ward off an unseen gaze. Sleep, when it finally claimed him hours later, was a restless, fitful thing, haunted by the lingering chill of that spectral touch. He drifted into a dream, or perhaps it was more akin to a nightmare. He found himself standing on the familiar banks of the village stream, the water flowing with an unnatural lethargy,
its surface like polished obsidian. Before him loomed the old wooden bridge, its timbers warped and moss-covered, a skeletal arc against a sky the color of bruised plums. The air was heavy, thick with an unspoken sorrow. And then he saw her. Standing beneath the arch of the bridge, half submerged in the sluggish water, was a girl. Her ao lam, the traditional blue dress, clung to her slender frame, heavy and sodden. Her hair, long and black, cascaded around her, obscuring her face entirely, a dark curtain that veiled her features from his sight.
She stood motionless, her posture one of profound despair, and though he could not see her eyes, he felt her gaze, an intense, sorrowful focus directed upwards, towards him, towards the world above the murky depths. A silent plea, a profound grief emanated from her, chilling him to the bone. He tried to speak, to call out, but his throat was constricted, his voice trapped within him. He could only stand there, a helpless observer, as the chilling tableau unfolded. He woke with a gasp, sweat beading on his forehead, the image of the girl vivid and unsettling. The dream's oppressive atmosphere clung to him, a cold film on his skin. He pushed himself upright, running a hand through his disheveled hair, trying to shake off the lingering tendrils of that spectral encounter. It was just a dream, he told himself, a byproduct of stress, of his overactive imagination, processing the local superstitions and the strange incident with the handprint.
Yet a deep-seated unease persisted, a feeling that this dream was more than just a fleeting nocturnal fantasy. The morning sun, usually a welcome beacon, seemed to mock his inner turmoil. He forced himself to rise, to begin the day's work. His first task was to re-familiarize himself with the proposed site for the community center, an expansive plot of land just a stone's throw from the stream and, inevitably, the old wooden bridge. As he walked the perimeter, notebook in hand, he felt the land itself seemed to hum with a strange, low vibration. The villagers' whispers about the ancient execution ground, about the lingering Wan He, felt less like superstition and more like a palpable presence here, a weighty sadness in the very soil beneath his feet. Later, back in his temporary studio, a repurposed storage shed on his family's property, Ha booted up his laptop, his design software springing to life. He opened the file for the community center layout, a pristine digital canvas waiting for his architectural vision. He had painstakingly refined the initial sketches the previous day, saving and resaving the clean lines, the precise dimensions. But as the image materialized on his screen, his eyes narrowed. In a shadowy corner of the blueprint, subtly integrated into the structural lines, was a faint, almost transparent silhouette. It was a human figure, indistinct yet undeniably there, standing as if observing the nascent design. He blinked, rubbing his eyes. A glitch, surely. He clicked undo repeatedly, then selected the phantom shape and deleted it, watching it vanish. He saved the file, meticulously checking that it was clean, and closed the program, dismissing it as a software anomaly. Driven by a nascent curiosity, Ha decided to spend his lunch break wandering through the village, striking up conversations.
He began with innocuous questions, asking about the village's history, its old customs, anything that might shed light on the pervasive sense of unease he felt. He spoke to an elderly woman selling sticky rice cakes by the market, then a stoic fisherman mending his nets near the stream. When he delicately broached the subject of the old times, of any unusual occurrences or strange stories associated with the land, their faces subtly shifted, their smiles faltered, their eyes clouded over. Conversations grew clipped, sentences unfinished. They would suddenly remember an urgent chore or recall a distant relative they needed to visit, turning away with hurried excuses and averted gazes. He overheard a fragment of conversation near the village well. "Twee, by the bridge, such a tragedy. May she rest." The name, Twee, hung in the air, electric with unspoken meaning. His ears perked up. He approached the two older women who had been speaking, a polite smile on his face.
"Excuse me," he began. "I couldn't help but overhear. You mentioned someone named Thwee. I'm curious about the village's past as part of my project. Was she someone who lived here long ago?" The effect was immediate and startling. One woman gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. The other, her face now a mask of fear, pulled her companion away, giving Ha a look of stark warning, as if he had uttered a forbidden word. They retreated quickly, their hushed whispers following them, vanishing around a corner. The abruptness of their departure left Ha standing alone by the well, the silence heavy and charged. Returning to his studio that evening, a profound sense of foreboding settled over him. He was tired, frustrated by the villagers' evasiveness. He opened his architectural file once more, hoping to make progress, to escape into the logical world of design. And there it was again, the faint, shadowy figure, standing in the exact same corner of his blueprint, observing his design. It was unmistakably there, defiant of his previous deletion, an unwelcome resident in his meticulously planned structure. It stared out from the digital canvas, a silent, unblinking specter, and Ha felt a cold certainty wash over him. This was no glitch. This was something else entirely, something reaching out from the shadows, demanding to be seen, demanding to be acknowledged. The village was not just keeping secrets from him. Something was trying to tell him a story. The digital apparition on his screen, a silent sentinel in the corner of his architectural dream, was no longer a mere anomaly. It was a message, a persistent presence that chilled him more deeply than any cold draft. Ha stared at it, the faint silhouette shimmering almost imperceptibly, its form indistinct yet undeniably feminine. He saved the file again, this time without attempting to delete the figure, a silent acknowledgement of its stubborn existence.
He spent the rest of the evening poring over old village maps, historical records he'd managed to find in the dusty communal archives, searching for any mention of the name Thwee or any unusual incidents near the old bridge. But the records were sparse, offering only dry facts about harvests and family lineages. The name Thwee remained conspicuously absent from any official documents, as if she had been erased from history itself. The following days were a blur of unsettling repetitions. Each morning, Ha would wake from the same dream, the girl in the owl lam, her face obscured by a veil of dark hair, standing beneath the decaying arch of the wooden bridge, her gaze fixed upwards, a silent, desperate plea. Each time he opened his architectural file, the shadowy figure would be there, standing patiently in the corner, a haunting muse. And each time he cautiously broached the name Thwee to a villager, he was met with the same wall of silence, the same abrupt departures, the same thinly veiled fear in their eyes. It was as if a collective, unspoken pact of denial bound the community, a tightly woven tapestry of forgotten truths that no one dared unravel. Frustration simmered beneath Ha's calm exterior. He was a man of logic, of lines and angles and concrete structures. This spectral game, this dance with unseen entities, was outside the realm of his understanding. Yet the evidence was undeniable. The wet handprint, the recurring dream, the digital apparition, the villagers' terrified silence. Something was terribly wrong, and he, a reluctant outsider, drawn into the heart of an ancient mystery, felt an inexplicable pull to uncover it.
He knew there was only one person in the village who might be willing to speak of such things. One person who held the keys to the unspoken stories. Ba Men.
The village's sole spirit medium, a woman whose 70 years sat lightly on her, though her eyes held the wisdom of generations. She lived in a small, weathered house at the edge of the village, surrounded by an unruly garden of medicinal herbs and flowering plants. Her reputation was dual-edged, revered for her ability to commune with the unseen, yet also feared for her knowledge of things best left undisturbed. Villagers sought her out in times of sickness or spiritual distress, but avoided her gaze in everyday encounters, as if afraid she might peer too deeply into their souls. Ha found her in her garden, her gnarled fingers expertly tending to a patch of iridescent blue flowers. She wore a simple brown tunic, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun. As he approached, she straightened slowly, her movements deliberate, her eyes, dark and knowing, already fixed on him. There was no surprise in her gaze, only a calm, almost weary acceptance.
It was as if she had been expecting him. "Ah," she said, her voice a low, raspy murmur. "You've come." It wasn't a question. He nodded, feeling a strange blend of relief and trepidation. "Barman, I need to ask you about something." She turned fully to face him, her gaze unwavering. "The spirits are restless, aren't they? And you, my dear boy, are sensitive to their whispers, like your grandmother was." A surprising detail, a connection to a past he barely remembered. He took a deep breath. "I've been hearing things, seeing things, a handprint, a dream of a girl by the bridge, and a name, Thui. No one in the village will speak of her." Barman's expression remained placid, yet a subtle shadow crossed her eyes, a flicker of ancient sorrow. She led him to a small wooden bench beneath the shade of a mango tree. The air around them grew still, the usual hum of insects fading into a profound silence.
She poured them both a cup of fragrant herbal tea from a steaming pot she had ready on a nearby table, her hands steady despite their age. "The village has a long memory," she began, her voice soft, almost a lament. "But some memories are too painful, too shameful to be spoken aloud. They are buried, not to protect the living, but to protect the secrets of the dead." She paused, taking a slow sip of her tea, allowing the silence to stretch, to amplify the weight of her words. "Thui, she was a beautiful girl 20 years ago, gentle, kind, with a spirit as clear as the mountain spring. But beauty, my child, can sometimes be a curse in a small, narrow-minded village." Ba Mens looked at Ha, her gaze piercing, as if urging him to truly understand. There was a tragedy, a dark rumor that swept through the village like a fever. They said she had Yembua, cursed, the eldest son of the Lei family. He had fallen into a madness, screaming obscenities, writhing in fits.
The Lei family was powerful, influential. They needed a scapegoat. Ha listened, riveted, the pieces of the puzzle slowly beginning to shift, to click into place with an ominous resonance. Yembua? But was there any proof? Ba Men scoffed softly, a sound filled with bitter resignation. Proof? In such times, fear was proof enough. There was none, only whispers, conjecture, and the desperation of a powerful family to preserve its honor. The Lei son was respected. Sui was just a simple village girl. Who would believe her over them? Her voice dropped,
becoming a low, sorrowful whisper. The villagers, pressured by the Lay family, by their own fear of the unknown, turned on her. They accused her, ostracized her. They drove her to the old wooden bridge, the very place you see in your dreams, the place where the one key of generations still lingers. They didn't push her, no, but they forced her hand.
They told her there was no other way to cleanse her name, to spare her family the shame. They told her to the Van. The words hung in the air, heavy and cold. Self-sacrifice, suicide. Ha felt a sickening lurch in his stomach. Forced suicide. It was an execution by another name, just as brutal, just as final. At the bridge? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Ba Mans nodded slowly, her eyes distant, reliving a past horror. Yes, at the bridge. Her body was never truly found, swallowed by the currents, perhaps. But her spirit remained, lingering, lost, unable to find peace. She died unjustly, Ha, with her name sullied, her innocence questioned. The pain, the shame, the profound injustice, it rooted her to this earth. She became a Ling Hon Kam Chi Su Tuat, a spirit unable to transcend, the title of his own haunting, spoken aloud, confirming his deepest fears.
She's still here, Ha murmured, looking towards the direction of the stream, towards the old wooden bridge. That's why no one speaks of her. They're afraid. They are ashamed, Ma Mens corrected gently, her gaze softening. Ashamed of what they allowed to happen, of their complicity. Twee's spirit, unavenged, unredeemed, still wanders, searching for someone to believe her, searching for someone to understand her truth, to lift the heavy shroud of lies that condemned her. She placed her hand gently on hers arm, her touch surprisingly warm. And now it seems she has found you. The weight of her words settled on him, a burden both chilling and profoundly compelling. He had come to build a community center, but it was becoming terrifyingly clear that his true purpose in this village lay in uncovering a different kind of foundation, the truth buried beneath 2 decades of silence and fear.
Ba Men's words echoed in Ha's mind, a chilling pronouncement that shattered the last vestiges of his rational skepticism. He was no longer merely observing strange phenomena. He was entangled in a tragedy decades old, a silent witness to a wrong that demanded redress. The wet handprint, the recurring dream of the veiled girl beneath the bridge, the persistent figure in his blueprints, they weren't random occurrences. They were the desperate pleas of Twee's restless spirit, a lost soul reaching out from the murky depths of the past, seeking a voice, seeking justice. Ha felt a profound sense of responsibility settle upon him, heavy and unexpected. He had come to build, but now he realized he might be here to excavate a truth far more fragile and complex than any architectural foundation. He thanked Ba Mens, his voice hoarse with emotion, and walked back towards his home in a daze.
The village, which had initially felt familiar and comforting, now seemed to pulse with a hidden narrative, every shadow a potential resting place for Twee's sorrow, every rustle of leaves a possible whisper of her despair. He looked at the old wooden bridge in the distance, a somber silhouette against the evening sky, and a cold shiver traced its way down his spine. It was no longer just an old structure.
It was a monument to an unspeakable injustice, a silent witness to a life cruelly extinguished. That night, the dream of the girl beneath the bridge returned with renewed intensity. This time, as she stood in the water, a subtle shift occurred. Her head tilted, as if listening, her obscured face seeming to turn towards him. A profound coldness permeated the dream, seeping into Ha's very bones. He woke up shivering, though the night air in his room was mild. The chill lingered, an icy grip on the back of his neck, long after he had left the dreamscape.
It was as if Thui's presence had brushed against him, a tangible physical sensation that transcended the boundaries of sleep and waking. The phenomena began to escalate, becoming more frequent, more insistent. As Ha sat at his desk, sketching designs for the community center, a sudden inexplicable coldness would wash over him, starting at his nape and spreading outwards, a chilling wave that prickled his skin. It was always accompanied by a faint, almost imperceptible shift in the air, a subtle disturbance that indicated an unseen presence. He would instinctively glance around, but find nothing. Yet the coldness, so distinct, so specific to a particular spot behind him, was undeniable. He understood then. This was Thui, making herself known, her spectral touch a calling card. One evening, deep in thought over his designs, he heard it, a soft, rhythmic tapping on his window. Tap, tap, tap. 3 distinct knocks, spaced evenly, followed by a profound silence.
He froze, his pen hovering over the paper. He waited, his heart thudding, a knot of dread tightening in his chest. Again, after a moment, tap, tap, tap. It wasn't the wind, nor a tree branch. It was too deliberate, too rhythmic. He knew, with a certainty that transcended logic, that it was Thui. She was knocking, trying to get his attention, trying to communicate. He didn't dare open the window this time. The memory of the wet handprint, of the empty, misty road, was too vivid. He simply sat there, listening to the spectral chalking, his mind racing, trying to decipher its silent message. His architectural designs, once a refuge of order and precision, began to mirror the chaos seeping into his reality. The shadowy figure in his blueprints became bolder, clearer, though still faceless. It began to shift its position, no longer confined to the corner. Sometimes it stood in the center of the hall, sometimes by the proposed entrance. Then, a more profound and unsettling transformation began.
He would save a perfectly rendered 3D model of the community center, only to open it later and find subtle distortions. The clean lines of the walls would ripple, the flat floor would warp, and the entire structure would slowly, subtly begin to take on the spectral form of the old wooden bridge. The community center's sleek modern lines would dissolve into the gnarled, moss-covered timbers of the ancient structure, and the solid ground would give way to the murky, reflective surface of the stream, its waters depicted with an uncanny, dark realism. Ha stared at the screen, a cold realization dawning on him. It wasn't just his imagination or a software glitch. Thui wasn't just observing his work, she was influencing it, shaping it. She was trying to lead him. The bridge, the water, they were the focal points of her tragedy, the scene of her forced demise. The recurring dream, the haunting image in his blueprints, they were all pointing him towards the same place.
She was guiding him back to the place of her death, a silent, desperate plea for him to search for the truth there. The sheer desperation of her actions solidified his resolve. This was not malevolence, not a vengeful haunting in the traditional sense. This was a spirit trapped by a profound injustice, a spirit desperately trying to communicate its truth. Ha felt an intense empathy for her plight,
a deep sadness for the young woman whose life had been so cruelly cut short, her name tarnished by a lie. He understood now that his task was not merely to build a community center, but to bring peace to a restless soul. He had to go to the bridge. He had to search for answers there, in the very place where her suffering began and ended. He was no longer just a sensitive architect. He was a reluctant detective, compelled by an unseen force to uncover a 20-year-old secret.
The spectral coldness on his nape, the 3 knocks, the morphing blueprints, they were all a haunting invitation, a desperate plea that Ha, now fully immersed in her story, knew he could no longer ignore. He would face the whispers of the past. He would brave the Wan He for Thui. The decision settled within Ha with a quiet, resolute certainty. He would go to the bridge, not as an architect, but as an investigator, driven by the relentless, heartbreaking whispers of Thui's spirit. The urgency in her manifestations, the growing clarity of her message, left him no alternative. He knew the villagers would avoid the place, especially after dark, viewing it as a locus of bad luck and lingering sorrow. But Ha knew it was also the key, the silent keeper of a hidden truth. He waited until the late afternoon, when the sun began its slow descent, casting long, ethereal shadows across the landscape.
The light was soft, diffused, lending an almost dreamlike quality to the familiar surroundings. He packed a small bag, a sturdy flashlight, a worn notebook, and a small digital camera, though he wasn't entirely sure why he felt the need for the latter. Perhaps it was the architect's inherent desire to document, to capture reality even when it veered into the spectral. As he walked, the path felt different. Every rustle in the trees, every murmur of the stream seemed amplified, imbued with a new, unsettling significance. The air grew colder as he approached the bridge, a familiar chill starting at his nape, a subtle confirmation that he was on the right path. The old wooden bridge appeared, exactly as in his dreams. Its timbers, weathered by decades of sun and rain, were slick with moss and the dampness of the perpetually shaded area beneath. The stream flowed languidly beneath it, its surface a mirror reflecting the encroaching dusk, dark and inscrutable. The silence here was profound, broken only by the gentle gurgle of the water and the distant chirping of crickets. It was a beautiful, yet profoundly melancholic place, heavy with the weight of its past. Ha walked onto the bridge, his footsteps echoing softly on the aged planks, a lone figure venturing into a forbidden memory. He peered into the water, imagining Thui standing there, her face obscured, her spirit trapped between worlds. The cold intensified, a palpable presence wrapping around him like an unseen shroud. He descended the muddy bank to stand beneath the arch of the bridge, the exact spot he'd seen in his recurring dream. The ground was soft, damp, covered in a tangle of weeds and creeping vines. He swept his flashlight beam across the undersides of the planks, along the murky water's edge, searching for what exactly? A clue? A sign? He wasn't sure. His architect's eye instinctively sought out anomalies, disruptions in the natural order.
But there was nothing obvious, just the decaying wood, the flowing water, the ancient stones that formed the bridge's foundation. He felt Thui's presence acutely here, a cold breath on his skin, a faint sadness that permeated the very air. He spent nearly an hour meticulously examining every inch of the area beneath the bridge, his hands brushing against cold, damp wood, his gaze scanning the muddy banks. Nothing. His hope began to wane, replaced by a growing sense of frustration and disappointment. Had he misinterpreted her signs? Was he chasing a ghost in vain? Just as he was about to give up, his flashlight beam snagged on something unusual. Tucked away deep beneath a gnarled root of an ancient banyan tree that stood close to the stream bank, almost swallowed by the earth, was a small, roughly built wooden structure.
It was little more than a crude, dilapidated choi, a tiny, abandoned shack that blended seamlessly with the tangled undergrowth, almost invisible to the casual observer. It seemed to have been there for decades, forgotten and slowly reclaimed by nature. A surge of adrenaline coursed through Ha. Why had he never noticed this before, and why was it so deliberately hidden? He pushed aside thick vines and thorny bushes, the rough branches scratching at his arms, until he reached the entrance of the choi. The small wooden door, barely hanging on its rusted hinges, sagged inward, inviting him into the cool, dark interior. The air inside was heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth and decay, a smell that hinted at long abandoned secrets. The cold at his nape intensified, a sharp, exhilarating rush that confirmed his discovery. This was it. This was where she was leading him. He aimed his flashlight into the darkness.
The choi was small, cramped, barely large enough for one person to stand upright. Cobwebs draped from the ceiling like tattered shrouds, and the earth floor was littered with dried leaves and debris. In one corner, almost obscured by a fallen meme, was a makeshift bed of woven straw mats, long since rotted. And beside it, partially buried under a pile of dried leaves and mud, was something else. A small wooden box, dark with age, its surface scarred and worn. It was secured with a rusty clasp, but the wood itself was beginning to rot, making it easy to pry open. Ha knelt, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He carefully brushed away the debris, revealing the box more clearly. It was simple, unadorned, clearly handmade. With trembling fingers, he managed to unlatch the rusty clasp, the ancient metal groaning softly in protest. The lid creaked open, revealing its contents.
Inside, nestled amongst a few dried flowers that had long lost their color, was a small, leather-bound book. Its cover was soft, supple, but stained with age and dampness. This was it. This had to be it. He carefully extracted the book. It was a diary. The pages, yellowed and fragile, were filled with a delicate, flowing script, faded ink chronicling a life long past. The first few pages were innocent, describing daily village life, the beauty of the stream, her simple joys. But as he flipped further, the tone shifted, growing darker, filled with a mounting sense of fear and despair. He scanned the dates, realizing with a jolt that they chronicled the days leading up to her disappearance, 20 years ago. The chill around him reached its peak, a profound, almost overwhelming cold that made his teeth chatter. He knew, instinctively, that Thuy was there with him, her presence tangible, her spectral breath on his skin, urging him to read, to understand.
He opened the diary to a later entry, his eyes scanning the elegant script, preparing himself for the truth she had so desperately tried to reveal. The silence of the choi pressed in, expectant, as Ha, the unwitting conduit, began to unravel a 2-decade-old lie. The diary felt impossibly heavy in Ha's hands, a fragile vessel laden with a lifetime of hidden sorrow.
The cold, damp air of the choi pressed in around him, and he could feel Thui's presence intensely, a silent, almost breathless anticipation. He carefully turned the brittle pages, his eyes adjusting to the dim light filtering through the door, augmented by the weak beam of his flashlight. The ink, though faded, was still legible, and the delicate script began to paint a picture more vivid and heartbreaking than any rumor. Thui's words flowed from the page, a torrent of raw emotion. Her early entry spoke of simple village life, the warmth of family, the beauty of nature.
She wrote of her hopes, her dreams, her quiet observations of the world around her. She loved the stream, the way the light danced on its surface, the sound of its ceaseless flow. She often sat by the old wooden bridge, finding solace in its quiet strength. Then, the tone began to shift, slowly at first, then with increasing urgency. She spoke of the lay family, not with reverence, but with a grown fear. She mentioned Levan, the eldest son, a man portrayed by the village as honorable and respected. But Thui's diary painted a different picture. She wrote of his persistent advances, his unwelcome touches, his unsettling gaze. She documented her increasing discomfort, her attempts to avoid him, her quiet pleas to her family, who, out of fear of the powerful Lay clan, urged her to ignore him, to be polite, to avoid confrontation. The innocence of her early entries gave way to a chilling narrative of escalating harassment. Then came the entry that made Ha's blood run cold.
It described a terrifying encounter, not a curse, but an act of brutal violence. Thui meticulously recounted how Levan had cornered her near the stream, close to the choi, in the shadows of the old bridge. He had disregarded her pleas, her struggles. She wrote of the terror, the pain, the profound violation. He had forced himself upon her. She was not a sorceress, not a purveyor of black magic. She was a victim. And Levan's subsequent madness, the fits and screaming that had led to her accusation, were not the result of a bua or a curse. They were the terrifying aftershocks of his own guilt, his own depravity. He was not mad because of a spell. He was mad because he had committed an atrocity, and his own conscience, or perhaps something darker, was tearing him apart. The diary continued, recounting the horrifying aftermath. She had been distraught, terrified, unsure of what to do. The Lay family, fearing the ruin of their esteemed son's reputation, had found out. They had not sought justice for Thui. Instead, they had plotted to silence her. They had twisted the truth, fabricating the story of the Imbua, painting her as a malevolent witch. They knew her vulnerability, her low standing in the rigid village hierarchy. They knew she had no one to truly protect her, no one powerful enough to stand against their lies. The final entries were a harrowing descent into despair. Thui wrote of the whispers, the accusations, the cold stares of the villagers who once knew her. Her family, pressured and threatened, could offer little solace. The powerful Lay family had orchestrated a campaign of terror, isolating her, condemning her. They had given her an ultimatum: either confess to the curse and remove it, or suffer a worse fate, bringing shame upon her entire lineage. They had made it clear that her Thutvan at the bridge was the only way to cleanse her name, to appease the gods and the distraught Lay family, to bring peace to the village.
A peace built on her destruction. She wrote of her profound agony, her utter helplessness, her desperate desire for someone to believe her, to speak her truth. Her final words, scrawled with a trembling hand, were a desperate plea, a last testament to her innocence. I did not curse him. I was wronged. May the truth one day rise from these waters, and may my spirit find peace when it does. She had hidden the diary here, in this forgotten choi, a final act of defiance, a desperate hope that one day someone would find it, someone would listen. Ha closed the diary gently, his hands shaking, his eyes stinging. The chilling cold of Thui's presence receded slightly, replaced by a profound sense of sorrow and indignation. The weight of her story, 20 years buried, pressed down on him. This was not just local legend, it was a heinous crime, meticulously covered up, and the entire village had been coerced into complicity.
The fear in their eyes when he mentioned Thui was not just fear of a ghost. It was fear of their own unspoken guilt, their participation in a monstrous lie. The Wanhi was not just a generic resentment. It was the concentrated, unyielding pain of one innocent girl, betrayed and sacrificed. He carefully placed the diary back into the box, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. He understood now. Thui wasn't just haunting him, she was entrusting him with her truth. She had guided him to this choi, to this hidden testimony, because she knew he was sensitive enough to perceive her, and perhaps strong enough to speak for her. The chilling cold he'd felt, the 3 knocks, the morphing blueprints, they were all desperate pleas for him to find this, her last will and testament. As he emerged from the choi, the setting sun cast long, dramatic shadows across the stream.
The old wooden bridge now seemed less melancholic and more like a symbol of defiance, a silent monument to the enduring power of truth. Ha looked at the world around him with new eyes. The tranquil village, the gentle stream, the ancient trees, all held the secret of Thui's suffering. He knew what he had to do. He had to bring her truth to light. He had to expose the lies that had condemned her. He had to clear her name, finally, after 20 long years of unceasing sorrow. This was no longer just a project. It was a sacred duty entrusted to him by a spirit yearning for justice. He would be Thui's voice, no matter the cost. He would ensure her spirit, her Ling Hong Kong Chu Siu Tuat, finally found its peace. The weight of Thui's diary, nestled securely in his backpack, felt like a burning ember against Ha's skin as he walked back from the bridge.
The tranquil village, usually a source of comfort, now seemed to press in on him. Every house a repository of complicity, every silent villager a keeper of a terrible secret. He knew he couldn't keep this truth to himself. Thui had suffered for 20 years, her spirit unable to transcend, solely because her story remained untold. His task was clear. He had to expose the Lei family's crimes and clear Thui's name. His first thought was to go to Ba Men's. She had known some of the truth, had hinted at the village's shame. Surely she would understand the urgency of bringing this full, horrifying revelation to light. He found her again in her garden, the twilight deepening around her. Her face, framed by the gathering shadows, seemed even more knowing, her eyes piercing straight through his own turmoil. "You found it," she stated, not a question, but a quiet affirmation. Ha nodded, pulling the diary from his bag. Everything.
The truth about Lei Van, about the family's lies, about how they forced her to her death. His voice trembled with a mixture of anger and grief. The villagers, they knew, they stood by, they let it happen. Ba Men took the diary, her garnalled fingers caressing the worn cover. She didn't open it, as if she already knew its contents. The village elders, the powerful families, they silenced everyone. Fear is a strong weapon, Ha. Fear of repercussions, fear of losing their livelihoods, fear of the Lei family's wrath, and shame. Shame for what they allowed to happen to a kind, innocent girl. She sighed, a deep, weary sound.
Some even convinced themselves it was for the good of the village to avoid further trouble. Such is the twisting of truth when fear takes hold. He laid out his plan. He would present the diary, the undeniable proof, to the current village head, to anyone who would listen. He would demand an official acknowledgement of Thui's innocence, a formal clearing of her name.
He spoke with a fervor born of righteous anger, envisioning a public apology, a monument to Thui, a long overdue act of remembrance and reconciliation that would finally allow her spirit to rest. Ba-Main listened patiently, her expression unreadable, her gaze distant. But as Ha finished, a new chill, far more intense than any he had felt before, began to seep into the air around them. It wasn't the familiar cold of Thui's guiding presence. This was something else, a profound, suffocating cold that carried with it a palpable sense of anger, a surge of raw, untamed emotion. The air grew heavy, thick with a palpable tension. The leaves on the surrounding trees rustled violently, though there was no wind. The delicate flowers in Ba-Main's garden seemed to shrivel slightly, their vibrant colors dimming. Ha looked around, a sudden cold dread washing over him. The twilight deepened unnaturally, plunging the garden into a premature gloom.
The familiar comfort of Ba-Main's presence was overshadowed by a looming, oppressive force. He turned back to her, his voice hesitant. What is this feeling? Ba-Main's face was etched with a deep, sorrowful concern. Her eyes, usually calm, now held a glimmer of fear. She placed a hand on his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "The Wand Key," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the rising, unseen current of air. "It is Thui's, but it is no longer seeking solace. It is transforming." As she spoke, the cold intensified, becoming unbearable. Ha's teeth began to chatter uncontrollably despite himself. He felt a sharp, piercing pain at the back of his neck, as if icy talons were digging into his flesh. The scent of damp earth and decay, which had been subtle at the Choi, now filled the air, acrid and overwhelming. Then he heard it, a low, guttural growl, not human, not animal, but something far more ancient and terrifying, vibrating through the very ground beneath his feet. Ba-Main's pulled him closer, her voice urgent now. Her pain, her anger, her betrayal, it has festered for too long, Ha. 20 years of silence, 20 years of being denied her truth. The moment you decided to bring her story to light, to stir the waters of the past, you also stirred her deepest, most potent emotions. The Wan He is taking hold. She is no longer just a lost soul seeking justice. She is becoming something else. He felt a sudden, intense wave of nausea, a dizzying sense of disorientation. The trees around them seemed to contort, their branches writhing like spectral limbs. He glimpsed a flicker of movement near the edge of the garden, a dark, indistinct shape that seemed to coalesce and then dissolve into the deepening shadows.
It was a terrifying, chaotic energy, completely unlike the subtle, sorrowful presence he had known. This was not the Thui who had guided him with gentle taps and morphing blueprints. This was raw, unbound rage. Her spirit is merging with the ancient Wan He of this land, the sorrows of all those unjustly taken here. Ba-Main explained, her voice strained. The anger, the hatred, the thirst for vengeance, it is consuming her. She is losing herself to it. She will attack anyone who comes near the bridge, anyone who might disturb her now that her story is revealed, even you, Ha.
The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. He had thought he was bringing peace, but he had inadvertently unleashed a storm. Thúy, the innocent victim, was now becoming a harbinger of wrath, her long-suppressed agony mutating into something destructive. The growl echoed again, closer this time, a chilling crescendo of pure, unadulterated hatred.
He looked into Ba Min's eyes, seeing not just fear, but a profound sadness, a premonition of what was to come. The effort to right a wrong had unintended, horrifying consequences. Thúy's quest for justice had turned into a desperate, uncontrollable cry for vengeance, and Ha, her unwitting champion, was now caught in the crossfire of her consuming rage. The peace he sought to bring her now seemed tragically out of reach. The growl intensified, a visceral wave of sound that vibrated through Ha's very bones, stealing the air from his lungs. It was no longer a distant rumble, but a presence looming just beyond the visible spectrum. The temperature plummeted, and the garden, once a place of healing herbs and gentle whispers, became a vortex of icy dread. Ha stumbled backward, Ba Min's grip on his arm still surprisingly firm, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and ancient understanding.
The spectral cold that had previously Thúy's sorrowful signature was now a bitter, suffocating frost, laced with an undeniable malice. "We must leave here," Ba Min's urged, her voice strained, pulling him towards the back door of her small house. "Her rage is too great. She cannot discern friend from foe now. The Onti has consumed her essence." Ha glanced back towards the bridge, a dark, skeletal form against the rapidly darkening sky. He saw nothing concrete, no distinct figure, but the air above the stream shimmered with an unnatural distortion, as if the very fabric of reality was being torn. He felt a sudden, sharp pressure on his chest, an invisible hand pushing him back, stealing his breath. It was a clear warning, an aggressive manifestation of Thúy's newfound, terrifying power. The spectral taps on his window, the gentle figure in his blueprint, now seemed like distant, almost innocent memories. This was something else entirely.
They barricaded themselves inside Ba Min's house, drawing thick curtains, lighting oil lamps to ward off the encroaching gloom. The growling continued, circling the house, a predatory sound that scraped against Ha's nerves. He could hear faint thuds against the walls, the unsettling scrape of something dragging across the roof. It was as if the very structure of the house was under siege by an invisible, enraged entity. Ba Min's began to chant softly, her voice low and resonant, reciting ancient protective verses, her hands moving in intricate, ritualistic gestures. The air inside the house, though still cold, felt slightly less oppressive, as if her wards offered a fragile shield against the storm outside. "This is what happens when a spirit's suffering is allowed to fester," Ba Min's explained, her voice grave, her eyes fixed on the flickering lamplight. "Justice denied becomes vengeance sought.
And when that vengeance intertwines with the ancient resentments of this cursed land, the spirit itself loses its way. Thúy's pain has curdled into pure hatred. She lashes out at everyone, anyone who comes close to her burial place, to the truth." Over the next few days, the village was gripped by a palpable fear. Ha tried to venture out, driven by a desperate need to find a solution, but the moment he approached the path leading to the stream, the chilling cold would descend, accompanied by an eerie silence, then a sudden violent thrashing in the bushes, or the sound of unseen objects being hurled from the direction of the bridge.
Several villagers, emboldened by curiosity or necessity, also tried to approach the area. Old Man Ba, who fished by the stream, swore he saw a dark, swirling mist rise from the water, accompanied by a shriek that echoed with unbearable sorrow and fury, sending him fleeing in terror.
A group of children who ventured too close to the bridge reported seeing objects float in the air, then violently smash against the ancient timbers, narrowly missing them. The bridge, once merely a place of quiet tragedy, was now openly acknowledged as a dangerous, cursed site, a focal point of malevolent energy. The village head, a portly man named Ong Chirang, whose family had been complicit in the original cover-up, was in a state of panic. He called an emergency meeting, but Ha, seeing their fear and their continued unwillingness to confront the underlying truth of Thuy's diary, knew it would be futile. He tried to speak, to present the diary, but his words were drowned out by frantic whispers and the insistence that Ba Men's perform a cleansing ritual, a lezayom, to appease the disturbed spirit. They wanted to banish the ghost, not acknowledge the crime. Ba Men's, despite her earlier warnings, agreed to perform the ritual.
She knew it was the only way to perhaps calm Thuy, to attempt to draw her back from the abyss of rage. But she confided in Ha, her eyes heavy with sorrow. A lezaywan is meant to bring peace to a righteous spirit, to help it cross over once its truth is known and acknowledged. But Thuy, she is no longer entirely righteous. The hate has taken too deep a root. This may not be enough, Ha. The Wan Ki has made her too strong, too consumed. The day of the ritual dawned gray and oppressive, matching the somber mood of the village. A large crowd gathered at the edge of the path leading to the bridge, a respectful yet fearful distance maintained. Ba Men's, dressed in ceremonial robes, her face stoic, began the elaborate ritual. She chanted, offered incense, and performed intricate gestures, her voice resonating with ancient power. Ha stood beside her, the diary clutched tightly in his hand, a silent testament to the injustice he hoped this ritual would finally rectify.
He hoped against hope that Thuy would respond to the genuine desire for peace, that her true self, the innocent girl, would emerge from the shroud of hate. As Ba Men's neared the climax of the ritual, her voice rising in a final, powerful invocation, the world around them seemed to hold its breath. A profound silence descended, broken only by the rushing of the stream. Then, from the direction of the bridge, came not a gentle response, not a sign of peace, but a sudden ear-splitting shriek that tore through the air, raw and full of agonizing fury. It was a sound of pure, untamed hatred, a sound that brought the villagers to their knees in terror. The air around the bridge began to swirl, a violent maelstrom of dark mist and unseen forces. Trees along the bank thrashed violently, branches snapping with splintering cracks. Rocks and debris were hurled from the direction of the bridge, whistling past the terrified villagers.
Ba Men stumbled, clutching her head, her face contorted in pain as if an unseen force was attacking her. She cried out, her ritual disrupted, her voice barely a whisper. She resists, she rejects it. The Wan Ki is too strong. Then, with a terrifying suddenness, a dark, indistinct shape materialized on the old wooden bridge. It was undeniably feminine, the form of a young woman, but she was no longer the sorrowful, veiled figure of Ha's dreams. Her hair, once a cascade, now seemed to writhe like serpents around her head. Her blue dress, tattered and flowing, seemed to ripple with an unearthly glow, a dark, malevolent aura. And though her face remained obscured by shadow and swirling mist, Ha felt the full force of her gaze, a burning, vengeful hatred that reached out and pierced him to his core.
The creature on the bridge let out another shriek, a sound that seemed to tear at the very fabric of reality. And then, with unnatural speed, it lunged, not towards the villagers, but directly at Ba Men and Ha, a terrifying manifestation of pure, unbridled rage. The ritual had failed. Thuy, the innocent victim, had been consumed by the very injustice she had suffered, transforming into a vengeful spirit, her Ling Hon Kong Chu Xiao Tuat now a monstrous entity of wrath, attacking the very people who sought to bring her peace. And Ha, standing there, diary still clutched in his trembling hand, realized with a cold, sickening dread that his quest for justice had awakened a nightmare he might never escape. The shriek that tore from the figure on the bridge was not merely a sound, it was a physical force, a blast of pure, concentrated fury that slammed into Ha, knocking the air from his lungs.
An icy vortex erupted from the bridge, tearing through the air, sending leaves and debris swirling in a violent dance. Ba Min's, despite her age, reacted with astonishing speed, throwing her body over Ha, chanting a desperate, rapid incantation. Her voice, however, was swallowed by the overwhelming howl of the vengeful spirit. The ground beneath them trembled, and the terrified villagers, previously frozen in fear, broke into a panicked flight, scattering in every direction, their desperate cries echoing through the darkening landscape. The ritual, the Les Ion, meant to bring peace, crumbled in the face of Thuy's unbridled rage. The offerings were scattered, the incense extinguished by an unseen gust, the delicate ceremonial objects flung into the churning stream. The dark, swirling entity on the bridge let out another terrifying wail, its form fluctuating, growing larger, more amorphous, a towering shadow of resentment.
It was no longer a lost girl. It was the embodiment of 2 decades of injustice, amplified by the inherent malice of the ancient execution ground. The cold was no longer just a chill. It was a biting, soul-searing frost that permeated every fiber of Ha's being, leaving him breathless and trembling. Ba Men's collapsed, her protective incantations dying on her lips, her body racked with tremors. The spiritual backlash was immense, draining her energy, leaving her vulnerable. Ha scrambled to help her, his mind reeling, his carefully constructed understanding of the situation shattering around him. He had intended to bring peace, to right a grievous wrong, but his actions had only stoked the embers of Thuy's suffering into an inferno of hatred. The diary, still clutched in his hand, felt utterly useless, a fragile piece of paper against an indomitable storm. The truth, once a key to liberation, had become a trigger for ultimate vengeance.
The spirit on the bridge solidified slightly, its form still wreathed in shadows, but now its presence was overwhelmingly malevolent. It didn't launch another direct attack, but its rage permeated the very atmosphere, pressing down on the village like an invisible hand, choking out hope. The trees surrounding the stream seemed to wither under its oppressive gaze, their leaves turning brittle and dark. The water in the stream, which had once been a symbol of life, now appeared stagnant, black, reflecting nothing but the deepening despair. With a final, desperate burst of strength, Ba Men's managed to push Ha away from the immediate vicinity of the bridge, away from the raw core of Thuy's wrath. "Go, Ha," she rasped,
her voice weak but firm. "You cannot fight this. The On-Ki has consumed her completely. There is no reason left, only hate. She cannot be reasoned with. Not anymore." Her words were a death knell to Ha's hopes, confirming the tragic, irreversible failure of his mission.
Over the following days, the village became a profound silence and pervasive fear. The project for the community center was abandoned, its blueprints, including the one with the shadowy figure, relegated to a dusty drawer. No one dared venture near the old wooden bridge. The Lay family, already aware of Thui's diary's discovery, retreated into their ancestral home, their fear of the vengeful spirit eclipsing any remaining pride or desire for retribution against Ha. The heavy burden of their past crime, compounded by the terrifying present, became a constant torment. Ha, shattered and racked with guilt, found himself a pariah. His attempts to reveal Thui's diary were met not with belief, but with renewed accusations that he had angered the spirits, that his meddling had unleashed a curse far worse than any they had known.
The villagers, desperate to escape the terror, clung to the familiar narrative, blaming him for disturbing the fragile peace they had maintained for 2 decades. He understood, however bitterly, that their fear of the unknown outweighed their desire for truth. He eventually packed his bags, leaving the village that had once been his home, his architectural dreams now haunted by the spectral image of a bridge and a girl consumed by hate. The old wooden bridge remained. From that day on, no one ever repaired its decaying timbers. It stood as a grim, silent monument to a tragic injustice and its horrifying consequences. The stream beneath it flowed, but its waters always seemed darker, colder, its gurgle a melancholic dirge. And every rainy night, when the mists rolled in from the forest, clinging low to the ground and obscuring the edges of the village, people would speak in hushed whispers of a chilling sight.
They would see the shadow of a girl, slender and sorrowful, standing on the old wooden bridge. Her tattered owl lamb, once blue, now seemed to ripple with the darkness of the night, and her long hair, a curtain in Ha's dreams, was now tossed by unseen winds, revealing her face, and her eyes, those eyes that Ha had yearned to see, were no longer filled with the sadness of a lost soul or the desperate plea for justice. No, her eyes, burning with an unholy light in the perpetual twilight, were utterly, horrifyingly consumed. They were filled, irrevocably, with nothing but cold, eternal hatred. Three, the innocent girl, was gone, replaced by the relentless, vengeful spirit of the Ling Hon Hong Chu Siu Tuat, and her long, dark night of rage had only just begun.